I appreciate you joining me for another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. In keeping with our theme of our gifted toolbox, I'm going to show you another strategy today that can be used to challenge students to think cognitively, to think outside the box, to try something different at the risk of failure, but failure is perfectly okay, and you learn from that failure. And this is not only for gifted students, this can be used for any students, but it does tend to challenge gifted students cognitively at the level that they're able to handle. So what I'm going to be showing you are STEM design challenges. So what are STEM design challenges? Well, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math, but it's more than just cramming those four subject areas together. STEM to me means using the engineering design process, which you see here. So the engineering design process, no matter how long your project is applying this process to it. So at first, you ask questions. Sometimes these questions are provided by the teacher. Sometimes they're asked by the students. Same thing with the constraints. Sometimes the teacher says you can and cannot do this. Sometimes the students will say these are things that we'll be able to do and these are things we will not be able to do. So the asking can be developed by the students or it can be presented by the teacher. 2 is imagining, and this is all student-led. The idea here is we have this problem that we've asked. So what are all of the possibilities, no matter how outrageous they may be? We want students to brainstorm and think about multiple possibilities for solutions to this problem. And if you're asking the correct question, there will be multiple solutions. There won't just be a single one. I'm always amazed when I do a project with kids, and I have 30 kids in the classroom, and they all 30 come up with different solutions to that problem. And that's kind of what you want. You want there to be infinite possibilities so the students can come up with all sorts of things and use their own imagination and their creativity. So they're just going to be imagining, whether individually or with a partner or in a group, they're going to be brainstorming a ton of ideas, just throwing ideas out and saying, will this work? What is the possibility of this working? What is the possibility of this not working? Eventually, this brainstorming, as fun and amazing as it is, does need to be boiled down to a single solution. So what is the solution that you are going to pursue and how are you going to pursue it? So this does cause students to have to use a funneling of these ideas. And so sometimes I'll use graphic organizers like you see here to try to funnel their ideas into a single idea. It can be helpful to get them to, because they have these wonderfully creative ideas, but you do have to consider how realistic they are, or do you have enough time to do it, or do they work within the constraints? And then so these graphic organizers can help them to choose the best one. The third part is to plan. So now that you have a solution that you would like to try, you need to plan for that solution. What is that solution going to look like? You could be drawing something, you could be, outlining something out, you could be doing all sorts of things. You also have to make a list of the materials that you're going to need in order to use this plan. So if you are having to build something, what are the materials that you need to build it? If you're having to put something together, what are the materials you're going to need for that? So you have to plan for all those things. I always have students plan these out and give me a drawing, a design of these first, because people don't start building buildings without a plan. People don't start building inventions or products without a plan. You have to have this plan, otherwise there's no focus when you go to create. There's no thing put in place that allows them to be successful in creating their solution. So the next step 4, is the creating. So now that you have this plan and you've gathered the materials, now students need to put this together. And the important part of this is they have to test it, because the greatest plans in your head may not look the same, or on paper, may not look the same once you actually start to put it together. You may think one thing, and yet another thing is the reality, or it's not feasible to do it the way that you're imagining it, or there's a better way that you find as you're putting it together. So during this creating phase, you are putting together prototypes or examples of your solution and then testing them and see how they work. And troubleshooting and trying things and failing at things. And again, that's perfectly okay. That's part of the culture of this engineering design process is fail, learn from that failure, try something else. The last phase of the engineering design process is the improving. So this is one that oftentimes teachers don't take time to do, but it's really important. So what I'll have them do is I'll have them actually put their creation into play in a real world situation. And so by doing this, they will see how successful they will be. So I may give them something that allows them to test this, the actual finished product, and they'll see, is it going to be successful? Is it not going to be successful? If it's not going to be successful, what are ways that we can improve it? Are there things that we can tweak to make it even more effective? And so this improvement phase is really important in the engineering design process because it allows students to take their ideas and refine them and to understand that your first idea is not always your best idea. As a matter of fact, oftentimes it is not. It is a process and it involves thinking and it involves, coming at from a different angle and looking at a different perspective. And so this improving is really important to the engineering design process. The length of these design challenges varies depending upon your needs. So it could take 10 minutes to do the STEM design challenge. And during that 10 minutes, students are still using the engineering design process. They're going through all the steps. They're just going through them more rapidly. So they may only spend a minute on the asking questions, and they may only have a couple minutes to work on the imagining and so on and so forth. So they'll have to figure out how to manage their time, which is part of the learning process, especially when they look at the improving phase, is could they have spent more time on something and less time on something else? And so that's part of that learning process. It could take a whole day. So we have on our gifted team here, Fridays are STEM design days, and students work in groups or in pairs on a STEM design challenge for the entire day. And so they're presented with a problem by the teachers, and then those students then work on that problem and try to solve it and come up with solutions. And then by the end of the day, they're presenting that. So their timeline on the engineering design process becomes longer. So they can spend more time imagining, they can spend more time planning. Before they actually get to the creating aspects of it. And it's really important to slow students down on this imagining and planning phase, because a lot of times they just want to jump in and start creating, but you need to have a plan. And it's important for students to understand that when you're going to do something, having a plan in place makes things much more smooth. It makes it easier to get your ideas across, and it just gives you a blueprint for what you're going to be doing. You could also, it could be the length of several weeks. So it could be a long-term project that they're doing the STEM design challenge for. And in this case, they're given even more time to do each of these steps. And so you, as the teacher, can either say you have a couple of days to imagine, you have a few days to plan, you can determine that management, but it's even better to let the students kind of figure that out themselves. For you just to give the constraint, look, you have 3 weeks to complete this project, the STEM design project. And what I want you to do is I want you to figure out how much time you're going to spend on each of the parts. And then this is going to help them manage their time better. And it's going to help them to figure out, to prioritize and figure out what needs to be done as opposed to what does not need to be done. So again, part of the learning process, which is why I like the STEM design challenges, because it involves a lot of 21st century skills, such as collaboration and problem solving and creativity. And so we want students to be learning these 21st century skills. So the first and the most simple one that I usually do when I'm introducing STEM design challenges to students or parents or even teachers is the paper tower challenge. So the paper tower challenge is really simple. You give students 20 pieces of regular paper. So just white paper, and you give them 20 pieces of that. And then what you do is you challenge them to make a tower as tall as they can using only the paper. They can cut the paper, they can manipulate the paper, they can crumble the paper up, they can fold it, they can do whatever they want with the paper. But they do have to figure out a way to, the end goal is to make the tower as tall as possible. And so they have to figure out, do they want to start with a big base? Do they just want to start building? There's a few reasons why I really like this challenge. First off, it's really simple. So anyone can do it. And it does employ the engineering design process. Students will go through all 5 of these in order to come up with their tower. And I may kind of guide them. I may say, you have a minute before you touch the piece of paper to imagine the possibilities, to talk about possibilities as a group, and then to develop a plan for the next minute, and then get into the creation phase. If you just have students jump in and start creating, you're selling them short on this engineering design process. Another reason I like this paper tower challenge is because it teaches them how to collaborate with one another, because it can be very frustrating trying to do something quickly with so many people. So if you have a group of 5 and they only have 10 minutes, you're going to have a lot of people that are stepping on toes and are saying things that other people don't agree with, and so on and so forth. So they have to learn pretty quickly to collaborate. So I use this as a collaboration tool as well. I also like the paper design challenge, or paper tower challenge, because I use it to show them that making mistakes is okay. So what I will typically do is I will say, you have 10 minutes to build a tower as tall as you can. And students do this. And then I go around with a yardstick and I measure their towers. Then what I say to them is I give them 20 new pieces of paper. And I say, okay, knowing what you know now, you have another 10 minutes. And your only goal is to make your tower higher than it was before. And this teaches them the improvement aspect and how to make things better. And now they're learning from their mistakes. One of those mistakes that I love that a lot of groups will make is they want to push the paper tower as tall as they can go. And as a result, they get to a point where it's tall, but they want to make it taller. And so they add that one extra piece of paper, and then the whole thing comes crashing down. And so it teaches you limitations, and that you don't have to always push it as far as you can certainly try that. It just means you have to start over again. But it teaches you that sometimes, pushing too hard or too far can result in negative consequences. So that is the paper tower challenge. And I will include a link to the paper tower challenge here, so you can access that lesson plan. Another fairly simple challenge that I like to use with students is the egg drop challenge. I like the egg drop challenge for a few reasons. First off, it can be done with any age group. So I've done this with second graders. I've done this with seniors in high school. The egg drop challenge is really simple, but the complexity of their thinking doesn't change. In other words, a second grader may come up with something that's a little more simple than a senior who has some engineering, under their belt. But at the same time, they're still solving the same problem, and they may come up with different ways to do this. So this is an example of the egg drop challenge. There are several variations on this, but the idea here is that students have to create a vessel or a structure in which they can put an egg and then drop it from at least 10 feet. And sometimes I'll vary this, the constraint of the height. So sometimes they have to do it from a second-story window if I have that available. So sometimes they may have to do it down a staircase if I have that available. It just depends on what you have available. So the easiest way to do it is just to stand on a chair and hold it 10 feet and drop it. But again, the layers of complexity can be added by increasing the amount of distance that you're dropping it. And so then what I do is I give students this list of items. You can see plastic straw, popsicle sticks, paper, socks, so on and so forth. And I tell them, when they imagine their solution and they come up with their plan, they can only use 5 of these. So I'm constraining them on purpose. I want them to only have certain things available, that the sky is not the limit, that sometimes when you go to solve something, there's only a certain amount of materials that you have to solve this problem. And so what I do is I give them this list, and then I have them talk it out as a group and figure out which 5 they're going to need. This is a longer term project. This takes 2 to 3 days if you're doing it 2 to 3 days in a row. Sometimes when I did this as a STEM design club, it would take us 2 to 3 weeks, because we would do one part one week, one part the second week, and so on and so forth. But if you're doing it in your classroom, you could do it in 3 days pretty easily. So the first day is just the planning. Coming up with the materials you're going to be using, and then coming up with a design for your structure. The second day is usually spent then them creating. So I'll bring in the items that they asked for, and I'll say, here, you have these items. You cannot reuse these items. In other words, if you have a balloon and it pops, I'm not giving you another one. So you have to figure out how to use what you're using um, within the constraints of the challenge. And so students will then create their vessel, and they will come up with, what they think is a good vessel that could drop an egg safely. The third day then is usually the improving phase. So what I do is I give students a golf ball, which is similar in size and weight to a egg, and I tell them to test their device and see how it's going to go. If the golf ball lands really, and it bounces really high, it's probably not a good vessel that's going to result in a egg being intact. If, however, there is minimal impact or there's not much to it, then the egg may survive. And so students then are then going to kind of, through trial and error, kind of redesign or improve or tweak their vessel so that they're going to have the greatest success. And so that's the third day. And then on the fourth day, typically I give them an egg. And this is always fun because it's fun to break eggs. And I make sure I put down a drop cloth or a plastic, so that the egg doesn't make a mess of the classroom. And I usually will ask the janitor to bring in a ladder. And so I stand on the ladder and to make it all, very ominous and, build the tension. And then we drop them one by one. And then what we do often is we'll talk about, if one is successful, why it was successful. If one is not successful, why it was not successful. Sometimes I'll have students do it. I'll have them reflect upon this in their groups afterwards. What might you have done differently? What would you have done differently knowing what you know now? And so I like this egg drop challenge because, again, it's pretty simple. It doesn't take that many materials. But it can challenge students to think in all sorts of different ways. If you gave the egg drop challenge to students 1 week and then gave them to them 2 weeks later, they may come up with something completely different, which is what is great about it, is the deliverable of the structure it could change from depending upon what the students are doing. So far I've shared with you a STEM challenge that would take maybe 10, 15 minutes. I've shared with you one that would maybe take a couple of days. And so what I'm going to share with you last is a long-term STEM design challenge. This is one that I used as part of my science curriculum. One of the content standards was about improving something that already existed. And so we did this STEM design challenge over the course of a few weeks. And the basic project was that I was asking students to invent a better mousetrap. So we looked at the original mousetrap and how, even though it was created hundreds of years ago, it is still widely used today. And what about it is effective, and what about it could be better, and why is this piece of technology not really advanced that much over the years, because it's able to do what it needs to do. So then I challenge them to create their own mousetrap, but then I put a constraint on them that is not. So one thing that we talk about when we talk about the original mousetrap is that it does kill the animal, and it can be messy, and it can usually only be used once, because once you have killed the animal, you don't want to reuse that. And so I gave them the challenge, the STEM design challenge, of creating a mousetrap that does not harm the mouse. That is the main constraint. Other than that, they can, the sky's the limit when it comes to what they want to do with their mousetrap. And so I give them steps to this. So we talk about, like I said, the original mousetrap. We talk about how to create a design. And so we go through the engineering process, which is that we brainstorm ideas. We come up with all sorts of interesting ideas and plan with our design, and then we actually create. So I bring in a bunch of tools and tell kids that bring their materials in to create their mousetraps, and students are making their mousetraps in the class. What is really interesting about this is I've done this with several different classes for several different years, and almost always the mousetraps are unique to one another. They're different from one another. So students get to share their ideas, and there are many multiple possibilities, so that what happens is that, I'm going to get products that are very original and unique, and they're going to allow kids to use their creativity. And so I do give them a timeline of the project. So I'm going to introduce it to them. I'm going to show them design of the trap. They're going to construct their model, and then they have to present their or give a demonstration for their mousetrap. So it could be a 1 to 3 minute. Just this is how it works, and I give them a fake mouse to demonstrate what it would look like and how it would not harm the mouse. And so this is the final aspect of that. And so the products are they have to turn in the design of the mousetrap, and then they have to show me the model of the mousetrap and demonstrate it. Here is a rubric that I use with them in order to for this project. So I'm looking at the design, I'm looking at the model, and I'm looking at the comparison between the design and the model. Were there changes that were made? Were there, and then this is also comparing it to the original trap. So how is your invention better, or your mousetrap better than the original one? And so this is one that usually took a few weeks. Students really got into this one, but it also taught them a lot of valuable engineering ideas, such as the improvement phase. So they would test their mousetraps, and if their mousetrap didn't work like they expected it to, then they would have to make adjustments. I would always wait to give them a little bit of information. For instance, the average mouse can jump up to 6 feet high. And so some kids would have like a mouse like falling into a bucket, and then the bucket being too tall for it to, but in reality it wasn't. And so I would say, oh, keep in mind that a mouse can jump 6 feet. And then you have to say, oh, now I have to change my design, or I have to figure out a way so they can't jump out. So I was kind of throwing in things as we went along to force them to improve and adjust and make changes to their original ideas. So that's the Invent a Better Mousetrap project. And I'll have a link here. This is on my website. The copy of this description sheet that I gave you and the rubric are on there, so you're more than welcome to access that. So where can you find STEM design challenges? One place you can find them is on my website, thegiftedguy.com. So if you go there and you click on resources, there's all sorts of resources on this page. One of them being STEM projects that are available for free. So I have the mousetrap one that I showed you earlier, the egg drop challenge, and then there's some other ones, and the paper tower challenge. There's some other ones on there as well. Another good place to start is instant challenges, which are created by Destination Imagination. So instant challenges can be hands-on, they can be building something or whatever, but instant challenges are usually 5 to 10 minute challenges. And I have a whole list of them here on the website where you can practice instant challenges, and they're all listed out here. And so you can use these as just little, they're not necessarily content tied to content or content specific, but you can use these just as little activities for students to do to get them used to the STEM design process. If you would like to find longer-term STEM projects, I do have a series of books. Each one has 10 STEM projects in them. They include the description of it, step-by-step, day by day, what it's going to look like. It also provides a rubric, and it provides a suggestion for a calendar as well. And these are available through proofrock.com. And you can also go on the internet and find STEM challenges. If you just put in STEM challenge in a Google search, or instant challenges in a Google search, you'll be able to find some that you're able to use.